And welcome to another Thursday night blather. This is Story Week. I've been telling my incarceration story in real time, except 50 years later. And today was actually a very significant day in that particular story because 50 years ago today, March 12th, 1976. Well, I'm going to read the story, but let's just say that what happened on March 12th, 1976 is something I was very much looking forward to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the story, um, and pop up every so often and embellish, elaborate, whatever. I'll answer any comments that come up. Glad we got a few people watching live. I appreciate that very much. Without further ado, here we go. This was written on July 26, 2007. As it turns out, the day the sheriffs took me to prison was a day I had very much been looking forward to. I won't bore you with too many of the boring penal code details, but the fact was that my time in county jail was doing nothing to shorten my sentence. I'd been sentenced to 1 year to life, which meant I would be eligible for parole after 1 year of custody in the custody of the New York State Department of Corrections. Those last 11 words are ugly because Albany County Jail, which is where I was when I woke up that morning, is run by the county and not by the state. So my time in county jail did not count one single minute towards that year I needed to do in state prison before I can even be considered for parole. Okay, now I'm off book. Um, I'm sorry if this is boring if you've heard this before. Basically, in New York State, they have what's called an indeterminate sentence. You get sentenced 2 to 4, 3 to 5, 10 to 20. All depends on what you did. Under the drug laws, and if you watch chapter 3, I talk about my plea bargain. Long story short, I was sentenced to 1 year to life, which is a really bizarre sentence. But it gets a little bit more bizarre because when I was locked up in Albany County Jail, well, here's the deal. Jail time counts, but it comes off the back end of your sentence. So if you're doing 2 to 4 and you spend, let's say, a year in county jail, well, when you finally hit stateside or state prison, you're only doing 2 to 3 because that year in county jail reduced the 4 of the 2 to 4 to 3. Now it's 2 to 3. Unfortunately for the blathering boomer, we were doing 1 year to life. So those days in county jail meant nothing because after one day I was doing life minus a day, and after a week I was doing life minus a week. So I couldn't wait to get to state prison. Back to the thing. 1976 happened to be a leap year, and I've been taken back into custody after I entered my guilty plea on February 23rd. Being locked up in county jail on February 29th was a double whammy under the circumstances. To be really honest, and to kind of call myself out on my taking literary liberties there, February 29th would have really mattered if I was already in state prison, because that would have been an extra day towards the 1 year. But as far as it actually went, February 29th was just another meaningless day in county jail. So anyway, back to the story. Not only that, but Albany County Jail was a terrible place. There were often bugs in the food and fights in the mess hall. Visitors spoke through a metal mesh located at about mouth level, so it was impossible to look at the person talking to you and also hear them. To hear them, you had to bend your ear to the mesh, and if you did that, you couldn't see the face of your visitor. I had a lot of visitors. In fact, I'm told there was one moment that the line for the visiting room got so crowded that the guard yelled out, "Is there anybody here to see anybody other than Michael Ungerleider?" Which I found really touching at the time. But the visiting room was hell there. Anyway, back to the story. I had a lot of visitors. That's what happens when you're in jail in the same county as university you have attended for the past 4.5 years. 4.5 years plus a summer. So I did a lot of bending down and not looking into the eyes of my friends when they talked to me in the visiting room. And time crawled by at the snailiest pace I can ever recall. Wheels spinning and spinning day after day, and every day would end with me not being a bit closer to getting out. What I believe would be a few days slowly stretched into 3 weeks, which might not sound like much, but it felt like 3 years at the time. When one's biggest hope every night is that one will be taken to state prison in the morning, one is clearly living far south of the Mendoza line. For those of you who are not baseball fans, the Mendoza line is a baseball thing. There was a batter named Mendoza who had batted exactly 200. And when somebody says you're batting below the Mendoza line, that means you're having a really, really bad year. So that's that reference for those of you who didn't get it. Back to the story. Well, it didn't take long for the waiting to develop a voice of its own, and it didn't take long for that voice to start whispering to my impatience, asking my impatience to please kick in and cause me to pull a guard aside and ask him what the fuck was going on with my transfer. But then my survival instinct kicked in a few decibels louder than my impatience and talked me into just hanging in there. So by now, it should make sense that when I was rudely awakened by one of the guards at 5:30 a.m. and told to pack my gear, I was positively euphoric, thinking that this was truly going to be a truly indeedy glorious day. At the risk of being embarrassingly repetitive, I must emphasize once again that to me, this was the dawning of the next necessary step towards this ordeal being over. 3 of us were going upstate that day. Gary Decker, who got way too drunk one night and was arrested for attempted robbery, although he claimed to not remember any details other than waking up behind bars. Jimmy Thomas, who got way too poor one decade and decided to guide Capital District tourists into handing him their wallets at gunpoint. And of course, me. And we were traveling in a style befitting the occasion. We were handcuffed to belts that were strapped around our waists, and we were put in leg irons. It was the first time I had ever worn leg irons. Go figure. I'll tell leg irons. But this story. Leg irons are a bitch. I hope none of you ever, ever, ever have to be in leg irons, nor me ever again. Leg irons are a bitch. If you don't know how to walk in them, you can really hurt yourself. But indeed, believe me, I didn't know how to walk in them. But indeed, I was euphoric, and so I barely noticed it when the shackles would hit my Achilles tendons every time I took too big a step, as we were being led to the transport vehicle that was awaiting us. Jimmy noticed it, though, and my stumbling seemed to bring out the professor in him. That day's lecture from Professor Jimmy Thomas went something like this. Nigga, you're going to learn how to walk in them here motherfuckers. You're going to break both your goddamn motherfucking legs before you ever get to the police car. That's a quote. That's a quote of somebody else using that forbidden word. And that's going to come up again. That actually raises an interesting issue is, people... I've seen people say that it's never okay for that word to cross a white man's lips. But what if a white man is writing a story quoting something a black guy said? So I'm giving myself a pass on this. If anybody has a serious objection, write to me on Twitter at UNG714, ugly nasty guy 714, and tell me why you think that my quoting Jimmy Thomas instructing me about the use of leg irons is racist. But absent that, I am going to get back to the story. So Professor Thomas gave me his lecture about wearing leg irons. Decker told Jimmy to shut the fuck up, and then one of the guards told all to be quiet, using his club as a pantomime. Well, to emphasize the point. I found all this to be morbidly funny, but I knew that my laughter would not add anything good to the scene. So I kept on walking, trying not to stumble and trying to keep a straight face, and we finally got to the car. One sheriff drove, another rode shotgun. We sat in the back. Gary Decker on the left, Jimmy Thomas in the middle, and me on the right. Looking back at it all, I guess we were sitting in alphabetical order. I don't like that line. I think that line's stupid. Oh, well, it's what I wrote back in 2007. We were rolling northbound on I-87. I got to point out something. I-87 North was the road that went from Albany to Montreal, via Saratoga. And I used to often go to Saratoga when I was attending the university in Albany. I got more than one speeding ticket on the way to Saratoga trying to make the daily double. That's just a little background information for you. So back to the story. We were rolling northbound on I-87, the Adirondack Northway, at close to 100 miles per hour. It's the only time in my life I was ever in a car that went over 90 with no fear of being stopped for speeding. My lawyer had told me that I was a cinch to be placed in an honor camp, given my education and lack of prior criminal record. I could hardly wait. So that's an important point. I knew I was on my way to reception, orientation, classification, all that. But I really thought I was on my way to some kind of medium or preferably minimum security facility. Anyway, back to this. So I'm going to repeat that. My lawyer had told me I was essentially placed in an honor camp. Given my education and lack of prior criminal record, I could hardly wait. Well, after an almost 3-hour northbound drive, we arrived in the small town of Dannemora, New York. So that's Clinton State Penitentiary. I knew I was going to go through a reception center for classification before being transferred, hopefully, to the camp. What I didn't know was the fact that the reception center was a maximum security facility behind a 30-foot high concrete wall, complete with armed guards and towers overlooking the visible echoes of 100 years of despair and terror. And that was just on first glance. A few seconds later, 6 words came to my mouth. There was a sheriff in close proximity to me, so I uttered them in his direction. I could still remember all 6 of the words. They were, "You have got to be kidding." I don't remember his reply. I was too busy watching euphoria exit and reality enter. So, get myself back up there. So that was 50 years ago today. That was 50 years ago today, and something wrong with my camera. I'm looking kind of blurry. Oh, I guess there was dirt. Yeah, sorry about that. Oh well, here I am. So now I'm just going to kind of jam because that story that I just read was a written story about the day that I was brought to state prison. Well, here's what happened next. I was yet to be fitted for my uniform. So they basically threw me in a cell with just the clothes on my back, the ones that I was wearing when I was in county jail. So I'm in the cell, and I'm only telling this story now because it happened that night. So the story I read was 50 years ago this morning. Now I'm going to tell you a story, not a written story. I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to tell it from 50 years ago tonight. They throw me in the cell. It's a little, it's a standard cell. One person cell, by the way. I'm not sure. I've seen a lot of prison movies where people had cellmates. I did not have a cellmate. I had my own cell. They brought me to H block. They brought me to the 4th tier, and they put me in the 40th cell. And being in the 40th cell, spoiler alert, when you had a shave, since nobody could have a razor, they would pass a razor down the tier. And I don't think the razor ever got changed. And I was in the 40th cell. So imagine shaving with a razor. This is before AIDS. This is before they knew about AIDS. Imagine shaving with a razor that's been passed down to you from 39 other cells. Now, yeah, in fairness, maybe they switched blades somewhere along the line. I don't know, but I was in the 40th cell. It was freezing cold. It was, like I said, it was March 12th. Dannemora is up by the Canadian border. And it's not a cliche. When that cell door closes, you enter a bit of reality that's impossible to describe. I don't want any of you to have to live it, but trust me, that cell door closing is a bright light of reality shining in an instant. The cell had a bed, a blanket. The blanket had a blood stain literally the size of a basketball. huge blood stain right in the middle of the blanket. That message wasn't lost on me at all. As if I wasn't scared enough to begin with. There was also a little table there with a metal stool next to it, and on the table was a pack of tobacco, top tobacco, pack of rolling papers. I don't recall the brand, um, a pencil, a piece of writing paper, and the only other things in the cell were a pair of headphones that was linked up to the to whatever radio station the guards wanted you to hear. I remember putting on the headphones, and the two stories that I was hearing a lot in my time in that cell, one was Patricia Hearst. There was a lot happening with Patty Hearst. And the other one was Hurricane Carter. There was a lot happening with Hurricane Carter. Details aren't important. I'm just trying to stamp the time there. I was, yeah. And there was a toilet and a roll of toilet paper. I'm glad they gave me toilet paper. No pillow. And it was cold. And I'd been up since 5:30 in the morning, and I was sleepy, but trying to take a nap was not easy. The blanket had a huge blood stain on it. So rolling it up and using it for a pillow, it was bad enough having to dodge the blood stain to use the blanket as a blanket. But using it as a pillow was out. I was not putting my head anywhere near that giant blood stain. But I felt like I wanted to utilize every item in the cell. It's kind of like when you go to a fancy hotel and you want to kind of use everything in the room because it's free. Well, this was no fancy hotel. And the guy that pushed me into that cell, he was no concierge. No, he was no concierge. And I was pretty glad that I was in my own cell because I was aware that of where I was. I was in a maximum security prison. I didn't want anybody near me. So I kind of was happy to be in the cell, I got to say. So I did my best to take a nap, actually got a few minutes sleep in, used the toilet, used the toilet paper, nothing remarkable to report there. And then there was the tobacco and the rolling papers. And I'm thinking, I had never smoked a cigarette in my life. Never had smoked a cigarette in my life up until that day. And I'm thinking, and there was a pack of matches too. I don't know what the brand was. So I rolled one up, took some tobacco, put in the papers, rolled up a nice fat one. And I'm thinking to myself, I know a lot of people just love tobacco. Maybe if I breathe this in real deep and really, really want it to get me high, it will work. Because my thinking was at the time, now mind you, I'm a 21-year-old, out of control, recently convicted felon who was experiencing rock bottom. But my thought in that 21-year-old rock bottom mind was, this really sucks. It's still going to suck, but maybe it'll suck a little bit less if I'm high. So I rolled up a fat one, licked it, rolled it up, lit the match, put it in my mouth, took a deep, and I started coughing like I'd never coughed in my life. I was coughing so hard. I'm gonna get back to the coughing thing because I gotta give a little bit more background information. When you're in that cell, I'm on the 4th tier in the 40th cell, and there's 5 more cells to my left. So there's 45 cells in a tier, 4 high. You got 180 cells. The first thing you notice when you get locked up is the yelling. People now, mind you, H Block is the reception center, so people aren't really doing their time yet. They're freshly in from county jails all over the state of New York. And they're all badasses. They're all yelling. One white guy's yelling, "On the Cosnotics! I'm a small city dope fiend. I'm a dope fiend on the Cosnotics." They're yelling on, again, without. I'm only going to give one quote, and that's coming up. But suffice to say, it was Laker game decibel level most of the day in H Block. So now again, back to the story. I take that big and I start coughing like I have never coughed in my life. I coughed so hard, I didn't even remember my name. I was coughing. I was like, there was only, I wasn't thinking about prison. I wasn't thinking about parole. I was definitely not thinking about Patty Hearst or Hurricane Carter. I was just, there were only two things in the world, coughing and not coughing. And not coughing was becoming significantly impossible. So just when just when I thought my lungs were about to come out of my mouth, all that shouting suddenly stopped, and a single voice rang out, and the single voice said, "Yo, somebody call the police! Some nigga having a motherfucking heart attack." Okay, now I hope some of you found that funny. I hope nobody's clutching their pearls because a white guy used the N word. Again, it's context. It's context, and I'll debate that point anytime. If you have a problem with that, either comment here or preferably DM me on Twitter, UNG714, ugly nasty guy 714. Anyway, that's what happened. So I'm still coughing. I hear that guy yell and I start laughing. And then I'm coughing and I'm laughing. And then everything came back to me. I started crying. And then I was coughing and crying and crying and laughing. And it was just a cycle of madness, absolute madness. Eventually things calmed down. So I have to preface, there's one thing I left out. On the way to my cell, they brought me to the barber shop, and some guy doing life, so, some guy doing life with tattoos all over himself, cut my hair because I was a long-haired 21-year-old hippie at the time, in prison in Dannemora at the time. I'm not sure how it is now. No mustaches, no beards, period. No mustaches past the corner of your mouth, and no hair over your ears. So they took me to the barbershop and cut my hair, and they cut my hair. I didn't have hair that short since I was a 12-year-old Boy Scout, telling you right now. So that was 50 years ago today. I'm going to be telling more stories next week because a lot happened in between March 12th and March 20th, which you know that song, Mama Tried. I turned 21 in prison, doing life without parole. Well, I turned 22 in prison, doing life. But I did have the right for parole. And yes, that's about it for now. That really is. This is kind of a short one tonight because I'm not getting all blathery about politics. This was chapter 4. Chapters 1, 2, and 3 have already been told. They happened on December 4th, 1975, the day I was arrested. December 11th, 1975, the day that my bail was not reduced. And I did another one a couple of weeks ago talking about the plea bargain that I ended up taking, which led to my 1 year to life sentence. So, Stephanie wonders why this is also important to me. I kind of feel like this was, I was in the IGC program in elementary school. My classmates and I had a reunion in 2009. They went on to become doctors, lawyers. One's a judge, veterinarians, and I ended up doing time. So, honor student, high school, college graduate, the whole thing. It's a unique story. And part of the way I rationalized being there was that I was going to one day tell the story about how all this happened leading up to being locked up and all that happened after being locked up. And so now we've already told the story that leads up to this and starting with the next chapter. So anyway, I will put links to chapters 1, 2, and 3 in the description to this video if you're curious about them. I appreciate everybody watching live. Thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. And for now, for my OG Blatherverse members and for those watching for the first time and everybody else who ever sees this, I will say the magic words that come at the end of every Blathercast, which are, the boomer has blathered. Thank you.